In the shadow of Egypt's golden sands lies the untold story of a woman history almost forgot. Evelyn Herbert, daughter of the 5th Earl of Carnarvon, stood beside her father and Howard Carter when the world first glimpsed the tomb of Tutankhamun. But behind the wonder and the fame came loss, mystery, and the haunting myth of a curse that would follow her for life. Her journey from privilege to heartbreak reveals not only the cost of discovery, but also the quiet strength of a woman who refused to be defined by tragedy. Welcome to our channel, Words of Time. In this video, we uncover the extraordinary life of Evelyn Herbert, the lady who lived beyond Tutankhamun's shadow. Evelyn Herbert was born into a world of rare privilege and tradition. As the daughter of the 5th Earl of Carnarvon, her life began within the grand halls of Highclere Castle, a place that represented the height of English aristocracy. The castle stood proudly in the rolling countryside of Hampshire, surrounded by miles of green parkland and quiet woodlands that seemed to stretch endlessly. For many, such a life would have promised comfort, status, and the kind of protection that came from an ancient title and old money. Yet for Evelyn, that same life became a gilded cage. She grew up surrounded by formality, etiquette, and expectations, but beneath the surface of that ordered world was a young woman whose curiosity and spirit could not be confined by drawing rooms and afternoon teas. Her father, George Herbert, the 5th Earl of Carnarvon, was a man of wealth and vision, known for his love of travel, his fascination with history, and his passion for ancient Egypt. His own life had taken a turn from the ordinary path expected of British nobility. After suffering a severe car accident early in life, he was advised by doctors to spend winters in warmer climates. Egypt, with its dry air and clear skies, became both a place of healing and of fascination. He began to collect antiquities, soon developing a genuine interest in archaeology. His name would one day become forever linked with one of the greatest discoveries in history, but long before that moment, he was simply a father with an adventurous heart and a daughter who inherited that same sense of wonder. Evelyn's early years were spent between the quiet elegance of English country life and the vibrant, intellectual circles her parents often moved within. At Highclere, the rhythm of life was steady and structured. Servants carried out their duties with practiced precision, while her mother, Almina Herbert, the Countess of Carnarvon, managed the household with grace and confidence. The Countess was known for her social energy and philanthropy, particularly her work turning parts of the estate into a hospital during the Great War. Evelyn grew up in an environment where privilege was mixed with duty and tradition was balanced, at least in part, with the idea of service. Still, there was something about Evelyn that set her apart from many young women of her class. She had been educated to fit the expectations of her position, but she never seemed fully satisfied with the roles laid out before her. While other young women of society might have been content with seasons in London, endless balls, and strategic marriages, Evelyn longed for something more meaningful. The grandeur of Highclere could not suppress her curiosity about the wider world. In the soft light of the library, where her father's books lined the shelves, she often listened to his stories of Egypt, tales of desert landscapes, hidden tombs, and the mysteries of ancient kings. Those stories lit a spark within her that would grow stronger with time. Highclere Castle, for all its beauty, could feel confining. It was a world of refinement, but also of rules and quiet restraint. Life there followed a pattern set generations before, with every season carrying its own expectations. The contrast between that order and her father's tales of the desert must have been striking. The image of endless sands, open skies, and lost civilizations offered a sense of freedom that the English countryside, for all its comfort, could not provide. To a young woman of Evelyn's temperament, the idea of stepping beyond the boundaries of her social world must have felt both daring and irresistible. When her father's interests in Egyptology deepened, Evelyn's involvement began almost naturally. She was fascinated by his passion and proud of his determination to pursue something so unusual for a man of his background. Lord Carnarvon had partnered with Howard Carter, a meticulous and driven archaeologist whose career had been marked by both skill and stubbornness. Together, they were searching for something elusive, the tomb of an unknown pharaoh that many believed no longer existed. It was an unlikely partnership between an English aristocrat and a professional archaeologist, yet it became one of the most famous collaborations in the history of exploration. Evelyn's decision to join her father in Egypt was surprising to many who knew her. Young women of her social standing were not expected to travel so far from home, especially to a land still considered exotic and unpredictable. But Evelyn was not easily dissuaded. Her mother, though cautious, understood her daughter's attachment to her father and her growing fascination with his work. So, when the opportunity came, Evelyn joined him, embarking on a journey that would not only change her life, but also place her in the center of one of the most remarkable archaeological discoveries of all time. Arriving in Egypt, Evelyn encountered a world completely unlike her own. The desert's vastness, the sound of the wind across the dunes, and the golden light of the sun at dawn created a landscape that felt both ancient and alive. The archaeological camps were filled with a blend of science and adventure. Workers, archaeologists, and local guides collaborated in an effort that combined skill, endurance, and patience. To Evelyn, this world was thrilling. Though she was an observer at first, she quickly grew to understand the discipline and dedication behind her father's work. It was not simply a matter of treasure hunting, as some critics claimed, but of uncovering and preserving a lost past. Her presence in Egypt drew curiosity and attention. She was known for her intelligence and grace, and her enthusiasm for the work impressed those around her. The relationship she shared with her father was one of deep affection and mutual respect. Lord Carnarvon valued her company not merely as a daughter, but as someone who shared his intellectual interests. The two spent hours discussing history, ancient art, and the meaning of discovery. For Evelyn, these were not idle conversations. Each artifact unearthed, each hieroglyph examined, deepened her understanding of the world and of her place within it. Evelyn's story stands out because it reflected a subtle but meaningful rebellion against the limitations of her time. Women of her generation and class were rarely encouraged to engage directly with academic or scientific pursuits, yet she managed to carve a space for herself in one of the most significant archaeological moments of the 20th century. When her father and Carter finally uncovered the sealed doorway to the tomb of Tutankhamun, Evelyn was there. The event marked a turning point not only in archaeology, but in her personal journey as well. Her decision to accompany her father had placed her in direct contact with history, bridging the distance between the comfort of her upbringing and the excitement of discovery. Though she did not claim the spotlight for herself, Evelyn played an important role in those tense and historic days following the discovery. Her presence brought a sense of composure to the camp as journalists and officials began to descend upon the site. She watched as Carter carefully documented each stage of the excavation, his focus unwavering, his method precise. The atmosphere was charged with awe and disbelief. It was said that when the first glimpse of the treasures was revealed, the glint of gold in the candlelight through a small breach in the doorway, her father turned to her, his voice filled with wonder, and whispered that he could see wonderful things. That phrase would forever be linked to the moment the world rediscovered a lost king. For Evelyn, the experience must have been overwhelming. She had stepped into a moment that would be written into the pages of history. Yet beneath the public fascination and the growing media frenzy, there was a quieter, more personal reality. She was witnessing her father's lifelong dream fulfilled, but she was also watching the toll it took on him. Lord Carnarvon's health had always been fragile, and the intense conditions of the excavation tested his endurance. The months that followed the discovery brought both triumph and tragedy. Her father's sudden death not long after the tomb was opened cast a shadow over the celebration. The world's attention turned to the so-called Curse of the Pharaohs, a myth that spread rapidly and added an eerie layer to an already sensational story. Evelyn bore her grief with dignity. For her, the loss was not simply the death of a famous figure, but the passing of a beloved parent and companion. The discovery that had united them in adventure now became a painful memory. Yet she never abandoned the sense of respect and fascination her father had instilled in her. The years that followed were marked by a quiet strength. Though she withdrew from the public eye, she remained proud of her part in that chapter of history. Her life after Egypt was more private, shaped by marriage and family, but her experiences in the desert had already defined her in a way few women of her time could claim. Looking back on Evelyn Herbert's early life, it becomes clear how extraordinary her path truly was. She had been born into a world that valued tradition, stability, and the preservation of status. Yet she found her purpose not in the rituals of high society, but in the pursuit of discovery. Her upbringing at Highclere gave her the education, confidence, and curiosity that prepared her to step beyond conventional boundaries. The same qualities that made her an exceptional daughter of the English aristocracy also made her an ideal companion for exploration. In following her father to Egypt, she bridged two worlds, one of privilege and another of adventure and scholarship. Her time at Highclere had taught her the meaning of refinement and discipline, but her experiences in Egypt taught her humility before the vastness of history. In the ruins and tombs of ancient Thebes, she saw the legacy of civilizations that had risen and fallen long before her own. The contrast between the permanence of stone monuments and the fragility of human life must have left a deep impression on her. Through her eyes, the world of the pharaohs became not just an academic subject, but a living reminder of human ambition and creativity. She came to understand that history was not confined to books or museums, but was a living presence beneath the sands, waiting to be uncovered. The story of Evelyn Herbert is often overshadowed by the fame of her father and the legend of Howard Carter, yet her contribution deserves recognition. She represented a bridge between generations and between social worlds. Her willingness to step beyond the expectations of her birth reflected a quiet courage that history sometimes overlooks. She was not an archaeologist by training, but her curiosity, composure, and empathy made her an important witness to a turning point in human understanding of the past. Her life reminds us that history is shaped not only by those who lead great expeditions, but also by those who choose to follow their convictions wherever they may lead. The image of Evelyn standing beside her father in the Valley of the Kings captures the essence of her journey. The young woman from an English castle surrounded by ancient tombs, her white dress bright against the golden sand, her eyes filled with wonder. In that moment, she embodied the meeting of two worlds, the old order of British aristocracy and the eternal mystery of ancient Egypt. It is a scene that still carries symbolic weight, representing both the curiosity that drives discovery and the human longing to connect with something greater than oneself. As the years passed, the story of the tomb's discovery became legend, retold in countless books, films, and documentaries. Highclere Castle itself would later capture new fame as the setting for a television drama. But behind its fictional stories lies the very real history of the Herbert family and their connection to Egypt. For Evelyn, that connection was personal and profound. Her memories of those days in the desert remained a defining part of her identity. Even in her later years, long after the world had moved on from the excitement of the discovery, she was still remembered as the girl who had witnessed history unfold before her eyes. Her life demonstrates how the boundaries of class and gender, though powerful, could be quietly challenged through curiosity and courage. Evelyn's choice to accompany her father was not a rebellion in the loud sense, but a simple act of following her interests and affections beyond what society expected. That decision placed her at the heart of one of the most famous archaeological moments ever recorded. It allowed her to see both the splendor of ancient Egypt and the fragility of human ambition. It also taught her that discovery comes with responsibility, the duty to respect and preserve what is found, and to understand that the past belongs to all humanity. Evelyn Herbert's story continues to inspire because it reflects the timeless human desire to seek meaning beyond comfort. She was born into one of England's most privileged families, yet she found fulfillment not in titles or wealth, but in participation, in being part of something greater than herself. Her journey from the drawing rooms of Highclere to the sands of Egypt mirrors the journey of many who have looked beyond their circumstances to pursue wonder and knowledge. Through her eyes, we are reminded that history is not only written by scholars and kings, but also by those who choose to step forward when opportunity calls. Her life remains a testament to the idea that privilege can be more than inheritance. It can be a platform for curiosity, for courage, and for the pursuit of truth. Evelyn's early decision to join her father was not simply an act of loyalty, but a reflection of her character, a willingness to embrace the unknown. That choice set her apart from the expectations of her peers and ensured her a quiet, but lasting place in the story of one of humanity's greatest discoveries. The sands of Egypt, where she once walked beside her father, still whisper of that moment when a young woman from an English castle became part of history's unfolding. The days that followed the first discovery in the Valley of the Kings felt to Evelyn Herbert like the turning of a great wheel of fate. She had come to Egypt as a daughter accompanying her father, never imagining that she would stand at the threshold of one of the most remarkable finds in human history. The quiet rhythm of excavation life had suddenly transformed into something charged with energy and expectation. Each dawn brought the possibility of revelation, and each evening ended in hushed conversations beneath the desert stars about what might be hidden behind the sealed walls that had lain untouched for more than 3,000 years. Evelyn had been present from the earliest signs that something extraordinary had been uncovered. The sealed doorway that Howard Carter and his workers had found bore the official stamp of the royal necropolis, a symbol that suggested it had not been disturbed since ancient times. When Carter's team cleared the last of the rubble and revealed the intact seal, Lord Carnarvon's excitement was palpable. Evelyn felt the same thrill, though hers was tempered by a deep sense of reverence. To her, this was not just a discovery of wealth or prestige. It was a bridge between two worlds, the modern and the ancient, the known and the mysterious. The days leading up to the tomb's opening were filled with careful preparation. Carter, ever the perfectionist, refused to allow haste to spoil the moment. He insisted on documentation, photography, and systematic excavation. Evelyn admired his focus, even if she sometimes found his manner brisk and exacting. He was a man driven by purpose, and though his working style was intense, she recognized that it was this same discipline that had made the discovery possible. Her father respected Carter deeply, though their relationship was not without tension. Carnarvon's financial support had made the expedition possible, but Carter's expertise had made it successful. Between them existed a fragile balance, the blend of a nobleman's enthusiasm and a professional's precision. Evelyn often found herself in the middle, observing their dynamic with understanding and affection. On the evening when Carter made the first small opening into the tomb's sealed wall, the desert was cool and the camp was still. Evelyn recalled the flicker of the candlelight, the faint sound of sand being brushed away, and the quiet murmur of anticipation that filled the air. Carter leaned close to the opening, peered inside, and remained silent for several moments. Lord Carnarvon, unable to contain himself, asked what he could see. Carter's reply, that he saw wonderful things, became one of the most repeated phrases in modern archaeology. Evelyn, standing beside her father, felt a surge of emotion that was difficult to describe. It was all mixed with disbelief, the realization that they had crossed a boundary between imagination and reality. In the days that followed, Evelyn continued to visit the site, her presence both welcomed and respected. She did not interfere with the work, but watched closely as Carter and his team began the painstaking process of cataloging every object in the antechamber. The first sight of the treasures was breathtaking. Gilded furniture, statues, chariots, and strange ceremonial objects filled the small room, piled high but untouched by time. Everything shimmered beneath the light of the lamps, revealing the craftsmanship of a long-lost world. To Evelyn, it felt as though the ancient Egyptians had sealed not only their possessions, but also their spirit within that room. Evelyn's awareness of the moment's gravity distinguished her from many of the onlookers who would later arrive. She was not drawn by curiosity alone, but by a deep sense of wonder. She knew that this find would change how the world understood Egypt's past, and perhaps even how it understood civilization itself. As she stood among the archaeologists, she could sense the weight of history pressing in on them. Not only the story of a young pharaoh, but also the legacy of human effort and imagination. She often thought of her father's years of persistence, the countless seasons spent searching, the disappointments endured, and the faith he had never lost. Carter, for his part, remained cautious and methodical. He knew that the tomb was only partly revealed, and that the next chambers might hold even greater treasures or fragile remains. Evelyn respected his restraint. Where others might have rushed forward in excitement, he insisted on procedure. He documented every artifact, drew sketches, and recorded the position of each item before moving anything. Lord Carnarvon admired his thoroughness, but grew impatient at times with the slow pace. He wanted to see more, to experience the culmination of all his years of investment and belief. Evelyn often found herself acting as a calming influence between the two men, reminding her father of Carter's expertise and assuring Carter of her father's respect. The working relationship between Carter and Carnarvon was one of mutual dependence, bound by shared ambition but strained by difference in temperament. Carter was reserved, sometimes brusque, deeply conscious of the scientific importance of his work. Carnarvon was sociable, eager to share the discovery with the world, proud not for himself, but for what the find represented to humanity. Evelyn understood both men. She saw her father's excitement and Carter's protective caution as two expressions of the same passion, a reverence for the past. The balance between them allowed the work to proceed, even amid growing attention from outsiders. Word of the discovery spread quickly beyond Egypt. Reporters arrived from London, Paris, and New York, seeking any scrap of information. The world's fascination with ancient Egypt had already been strong, but this event turned it into a global obsession. Newspapers published daily updates, often mixing fact with speculation. Some called it the greatest find in modern history. Others focused on the wealth of the objects, describing them as treasures beyond imagination. For Evelyn, the sudden glare of publicity felt strange. She had lived quietly at her father's side, her presence in Egypt a private family matter. Now, she found herself thrust into public view, her name appearing in articles and photographs, sometimes alongside dramatic headlines about the mysteries of the tomb. Despite the growing crowd of journalists, officials, and onlookers, Evelyn remained composed. She carried herself with the same quiet grace that had marked her life at Highclere. She spoke little to the press, preferring to let Carter and her father address the questions. Yet those who met her often remarked on her calm intelligence and her genuine appreciation for the archaeological work being done. She was not a tourist, but an observer who understood the gravity of what she was witnessing. To her, each artifact held meaning far beyond its material beauty. Every statue, amulet, and piece of furniture represented a fragment of a long-forgotten life. When the inner chambers were finally opened, revealing the sealed burial shrine, Evelyn was again among the few present. She described the moment as one of almost spiritual intensity. The air inside the tomb was still, carrying the faint scent of ancient oils. The flicker of the lamps illuminated the golden shrine that enclosed the sarcophagus of the boy king. It was as if time had folded upon itself, and she was standing at the meeting point between past and present. The craftsmanship, the colors, the sheer scale of what had been preserved astonished her. Even Carter, usually reserved, seemed moved to silence. Lord Carnarvon, his eyes shining with pride, stood beside his daughter, knowing that their years of effort had led to this moment. Evelyn noticed how Carter's demeanor shifted during these days. Though he maintained his strict focus, there were moments when emotion broke through his calm exterior. He had devoted much of his life to this pursuit, enduring skepticism and hardship. Now, as the ancient seals gave way and the treasures of the tomb came into view, she could see both exhaustion and fulfillment in his face. Her father, meanwhile, seemed reinvigorated despite his frail health. For years, his accident and its lingering effects had slowed him, but in these weeks he appeared energized, carried by the excitement of discovery. Evelyn worried for him, but could not deny the joy that shone from him. The collaboration between Carter and Carnarvon was not without friction in the weeks after the opening. The question of access and ownership began to complicate their partnership. The Egyptian government, aware of the tomb's immense value, tightened its control, and the flood of international attention added pressure. Evelyn found herself trying to maintain harmony, sensing that both men were being pulled by forces beyond their control. Carter by his sense of scientific duty, her father by the expectations of the press and the financial realities of the excavation. Through it all, she remained steady, offering quiet encouragement to both. The reaction across the world grew even more intense once official announcements were made. Newspapers printed vivid descriptions of the scene, often embellishing details to satisfy public curiosity. Photographs of the entrance to the tomb and the surrounding valley were circulated widely. Society in London and New York could talk of little else. Egyptomania swept across Europe, influencing art, fashion, and even architecture. Designers borrowed motifs from the tomb's decorations. Poets wrote verses inspired by the rediscovery of the pharaoh's resting place. Evelyn found herself at the center of a phenomenon far larger than anything she could have imagined. Letters poured in, some congratulating her, others asking for stories or souvenirs. She responded politely when necessary but remained private, feeling that what she had witnessed belonged more to history than to gossip. She also saw how fame could distort truth. Rumors began to spread about curses and misfortunes linked to the tomb. When her father's health suddenly declined, such whispers grew louder. The coincidence of his illness with the tomb's opening fed the imagination of the press. Evelyn, who had seen the reality of her father's condition and understood the fragility of his health long before Egypt, rejected such ideas. Yet she could not silence the world's fascination with mystery. The story of the so-called curse only added to the legend, casting a shadow over what should have been a moment of triumph. Her father's passing left her heartbroken. She had shared his passion, stood beside him in triumph, and now found herself facing the sorrow that followed. The world mourned Lord Carnarvon as the patron of the greatest archaeological discovery of the age, but to Evelyn he was simply her beloved father. She stayed in Egypt for a short time after his death, supporting Carter as he continued the work. Despite the strain between them caused by outside pressures, she respected his dedication and recognized that he was the only man capable of completing the excavation properly. In the months that followed, Evelyn returned to England, carrying memories that would never fade. Highclere Castle, once her entire world, now felt different, quieter, heavier with absence. Yet even amid grief, she held on to the pride of what she and her father had been part of. She followed reports of the ongoing work in the tomb, reading about each new chamber uncovered, each artifact restored. Carter continued his meticulous documentation, ensuring that the tomb's contents would be preserved for study and display rather than lost to greed or haste. Evelyn admired his commitment and often defended him against critics who accused him of being overly controlling. She knew better than most how much discipline such work required. The global fascination with Tutankhamun continued for decades, and Evelyn's name remained tied to the story. Yet she never sought attention or credit. She preferred to let history speak for itself. When asked about her memories, she would describe the discovery not in terms of treasure, but of wonder. The moment when she first saw the glint of gold through a small opening, the silence that followed Carter's whispered words, and the shared understanding between her father and herself that they had touched something eternal. Over time, the narrative of Tutankhamun's tomb became part of popular culture, retold in books, exhibitions, and films. The young pharaoh's mask became one of the most recognizable images in the world. Evelyn watched from afar as the legend grew, proud but modest. She knew that history often remembered names in broad strokes, Carter as the archaeologist, Carnarvon as the patron, and herself as the young woman who had witnessed it all. But she also understood that what truly mattered was not fame but preservation, not ownership but understanding. Evelyn's unique perspective allowed her to appreciate the human side of the discovery. She had seen the toll it took on those involved, the physical strain, the emotional burden, and the constant negotiation between science and spectacle. She admired Carter's unwavering sense of duty, even when the world misunderstood him, and cherished her father's courage in supporting a vision that few believed possible. To her, the tomb was not just a collection of artifacts, but a symbol of perseverance and faith in the value of knowledge. As she grew older, Evelyn often reflected on how that chapter had shaped her life. The experience in Egypt had opened her eyes to a world far beyond the boundaries of her upbringing. It had taught her humility before the vastness of time and given her a lasting respect for those who dedicate their lives to uncovering the past. She never forgot the sight of the desert at sunrise, the cool air before the heat of the day, and the sense of peace that came from standing among the ruins of an ancient civilization. In many ways, the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb marked the end of one era and the beginning of another. It transformed archaeology into a subject of worldwide fascination and redefined how people viewed ancient Egypt. For Evelyn Herbert, it was also a personal turning point, the moment when the boundaries of her world expanded beyond privilege and propriety into something timeless. Her journey from Highclere's manicured lawns to the golden sands of the Valley of the Kings embodied the meeting of tradition and curiosity, of inheritance and imagination. Her story remains a quiet thread woven through one of history's grandest narratives. She did not seek glory, yet she found herself forever linked to a discovery that captured the imagination of generations. Through her eyes, we can glimpse not only the wonder of the tomb's unveiling, but also the deeper meaning behind it. The human desire to understand the past, to touch eternity, and to find, within the dust of forgotten kings, a reflection of ourselves. The days following Lord Carnarvon's death brought a silence to the desert that Evelyn Herbert would never forget. Only a short time earlier, the valley had been filled with the noise of laborers, the scrape of tools, and the murmur of excitement as each chamber of the tomb revealed new wonders. Now the atmosphere felt heavy, as though the very sands were holding their breath. The man whose determination had made the discovery possible was gone, and with him ended the shared adventure that had bound father and daughter in purpose. For Evelyn, grief arrived suddenly and without comfort. The excitement that had carried her through long months of work and anticipation now turned to disbelief. The man who had inspired her curiosity and led her into the heart of Egypt's mysteries had been taken from her at the moment of triumph. The official reports described her father's illness as a complication from an infected mosquito bite that had grown worse after a shaving cut, leading to fever and pneumonia. Those who had known Lord Carnarvon were not surprised that his fragile health had failed under the strain of the desert. Yet the world beyond Egypt was quick to imagine something more dramatic. Within days of his death, newspapers began to print stories of an ancient curse that had fallen upon the discoverers of the tomb. The idea that a pharaoh's spirit had taken revenge for the disturbance of his resting place captured the imagination of the public. Writers filled columns with speculation, linking the death to mystical warnings supposedly found among the inscriptions. Evelyn read these accounts with disbelief and sorrow. She knew her father's condition had been delicate for years and that his passing was tragic but natural. Still, she could not prevent the spread of rumors that transformed personal loss into sensational myth. Evelyn had been raised to maintain dignity in the face of adversity, yet the flood of attention that followed was overwhelming. Messages of sympathy arrived from across the world, but they were often accompanied by questions about the so-called curse. Reporters waited outside her residence, eager to capture her reaction or coax a statement. Some even followed her as she traveled back to England, hoping for any gesture or word that could feed their headlines. She kept silent, understanding that anything she said would only encourage further speculation. Inside, however, she felt anger mixed with grief. The man who had dedicated his life to exploration and scholarship was being reduced to a character in a ghost story. The discovery that had meant so much to both of them was being overshadowed by superstition. In Cairo, the atmosphere was equally charged. The local population, long familiar with legends about the powers of the dead, regarded the news with a mixture of awe and fear. Even some members of Carter's team began to whisper about strange coincidences. Lights flickering, equipment failing, or sudden illnesses were all cited as signs of something beyond human understanding. Carter himself dismissed the stories as nonsense, reminding everyone that archaeology was a science, not a realm of magic. Yet he, too, could not escape the shadow of the rumor. The British press had found a story too tempting to ignore, and the more Carter protested, the more mysterious the tale became. Evelyn's position was especially painful because she was both participant and survivor. To the public, she was the daughter of the man supposedly struck down by the curse, a symbol of tragedy wrapped in mystery. The press described her in melodramatic tones, calling her the heiress of misfortune or the witness to a forbidden secret. Illustrations showed her in imagined scenes among pyramids and shadows, as though she were a figure from an ancient legend rather than a real woman mourning her father. Every detail of her life was examined. Even her silence was interpreted as evidence of hidden knowledge. Evelyn endured it all quietly, refusing to give interviews or make public appearances. She understood that no explanation could satisfy a public hungry for wonder. The more rational her words might be, the less likely they would be believed. The world wanted a tale of vengeance from beyond the grave, not a reminder that illness and fate often strike without reason. Her memories of her father's final days remained vivid. She remembered his weariness after long hours in the desert sun, his occasional coughing fits, and his stubborn refusal to rest. She also remembered his joy when he first looked into the tomb, the boyish excitement that had momentarily erased years of pain. That was the image she tried to hold on to, but the noise of the outside world made it difficult. Everywhere she turned, she saw distorted versions of the truth. Headlines shouted of doom. Novels were written about ancient maledictions, and theater productions borrowed freely from the story of Tutankhamun. The discovery had become entertainment. What had begun as a triumph of human curiosity and perseverance had turned into a spectacle of fear. Evelyn's grief deepened as she watched the story evolve. The loss of her father had already left her adrift, and now she found that the memory of him was being claimed by others. He was no longer the man she knew, intelligent, patient, and generous, but a character in a legend crafted by strangers. The image of the so-called curse began to take on a life of its own. Each time another person associated with the excavation suffered an accident or illness, the rumor grew. The public counted each misfortune as proof of supernatural punishment, ignoring the ordinary causes behind them. Evelyn tried to remind herself that fascination with mystery had always been part of human nature, but she could not help feeling that the story had stolen something sacred from her. Howard Carter, too, found himself besieged by the press. Though he denied the existence of any curse, even he could not stop the speculation. His letters and diaries from the period reveal a growing frustration with the media's obsession. He wanted the world to focus on the achievements of the excavation, the careful documentation of artifacts, and the insights gained into ancient Egyptian culture. Yet the public preferred to imagine hidden forces and dark prophecies. Evelyn sympathized with him. She knew that behind his reserved manner, he felt both pride and sorrow. The discovery had cost them dearly, and the price seemed to increase with each new headline. In England, the fascination reached fever pitch. Newspapers competed to publish the most dramatic accounts. Some claimed that an inscription on the tomb warned that death would come on swift wings to those who disturbed the king's rest. In truth, no such words were ever found, but the invention was too perfect for editors to resist. Spiritualists held seances, claiming to contact the spirit of the dead pharaoh. Writers and poets composed verses about the wrath of the ancient gods. Even members of the scientific community found themselves drawn into debates about the possibility of ancient toxins or hidden dangers within the tomb. The line between fact and fantasy blurred, and Evelyn watched helplessly as myth consumed history. Her return to Highclere Castle was marked by solitude. The estate, once filled with her father's energy, now seemed hollow. She avoided the rooms where they had shared stories and plans for future expeditions. In the evenings, she would walk through the gardens, remembering how he used to talk about the colors of the desert and the light over the Nile. Those memories were her comfort, yet they also sharpened the pain of loss. She found it difficult to accept that the world's understanding of her father's legacy had been replaced by whispers of superstition. When she tried to speak of his real achievements, people listened politely, but soon turned the conversation back to the curse. It was as though no one wanted the truth when the myth was more exciting. Despite her withdrawal from public life, Evelyn remained in contact with a few of her father's associates. Some visited her to offer condolences, while others sought her opinion about how to handle the continuing press attention. She advised them all to remain calm and focus on the work. She believed that time would eventually reveal the truth, and that history would remember the discovery for its scientific value rather than its legends. Her quiet strength impressed those who met her. Beneath her grief, there was still the same determination and dignity that had carried her through the excavation. She might have been young, but she possessed a maturity that came from enduring both wonder and loss within the same year. Meanwhile, the myth of the curse continued to grow. Each report of a death or accident connected to the expedition added another layer to the legend. A secretary's illness, a visitor's fall, a photographer's infection, all were linked to the tomb, no matter how far-fetched the connection. The pattern was irresistible to journalists and readers alike. The story of Tutankhamun had become a mirror reflecting the hopes and fears of an age that stood between tradition and modernity. The world was entering a new era of technology and science, yet still longed for mystery. The idea of an ancient power punishing modern intruders symbolized the tension between progress and reverence, reason and imagination. Evelyn recognized this, even as she rejected the superstition itself. She understood that people needed stories to make sense of the unknown, but she wished they could find meaning without turning tragedy into spectacle. As months turned into years, the intensity of the coverage slowly faded, though the legend never disappeared entirely. The excavation continued under Carter's direction, and Evelyn followed the progress from afar. She was proud of his dedication, even when critics accused him of being secretive or controlling. She knew that he was simply protecting the integrity of the work from those who sought only sensationalism. Whenever she read his reports, she was reminded of the seriousness and respect that had guided her father's vision. To her, the tomb was not a source of curses but a gift to humanity, a glimpse into a civilization that had achieved beauty, order, and faith thousands of years before her time. In private, Evelyn often reflected on the strange contrast between the truth she had lived and the myth the world had created. The reality of the discovery was one of patience, cooperation, and reverence. The myth was one of vengeance and fear. Yet she understood that once a story takes root in the imagination, it grows in ways no one can control. The curse became part of popular culture, retold in novels, plays, and later in films. It provided endless fascination, ensuring that the name of Tutankhamun would never be forgotten. In that sense, she sometimes thought, perhaps even the myths served a purpose. They kept history alive, even if in distorted form. But she never accepted that the legend defined her father's legacy. To her, his true legacy lay in courage, curiosity, and the belief that understanding the past could enrich the present. Evelyn's life in the years after the discovery gradually settled into quiet rhythm. She married and built a family, yet the shadow of Egypt never left her. Occasionally, journalists would track her down, asking for her memories or her opinion on new theories about the curse. She always declined politely. She felt that enough had been said, and that her role had been to witness, not to interpret. She preferred to keep her memories private, guarded like treasures of her own. The sound of sand underfoot, the glow of lamplight in the tomb, the expression on her father's face when he first glimpsed the wonders within, these images remained vivid to her until her final years. They were the truths she carried, untouched by rumor or fame. The world's fascination with the curse endured through generations. Each time a new discovery related to ancient Egypt made headlines, the story of Tutankhamun resurfaced. Writers would mention the deaths that followed the tomb's opening, often repeating long-debunked tales as though they were facts. Few remembered that many of those who worked on the excavation lived long lives. Fewer still mentioned Evelyn's part in the story or the grace with which she bore her loss. The myth had grown larger than the people within it. Yet for those who looked closely, her quiet strength offered a different kind of lesson. That history is not only about discovery, but also about endurance. In her later years, Evelyn occasionally returned to public life when invited to commemorations of the discovery. Her presence at such events always drew attention, not for what she said, but for what she represented. To those who met her, she was a living link to the moment when the modern world first looked upon the treasures of an ancient king. She spoke modestly about her memories, emphasizing her father's humanity and Carter's professionalism rather than the sensational tales that still surrounded the event. Her words reminded audiences that behind every legend lies a story of real people doing their best to pursue knowledge and preserve history. As she aged, the myth of the curse lost some of its menace and took on the softer quality of folklore. Scholars wrote new accounts that focused on the science, artistry, and cultural significance of the tomb's contents. The treasures that had once been hidden beneath the sands were now displayed in museums, studied and admired by millions. The Boy King had become a global symbol of ancient splendor, and the work begun by Lord Carnarvon and Howard Carter continued to influence archaeology for decades. Evelyn watched this transformation with quiet satisfaction. The noise of superstition had faded, and the truth had finally regained its voice. Her father's name, once entangled in rumor, was now recognized for its rightful place in history. Looking back on her life, Evelyn could see how the shadow of the so-called curse had followed her, yet she had refused to let it define her. She had faced loss, endured misunderstanding, and witnessed the world's hunger for mystery consume the facts she cherished. But through it all, she had remained faithful to her father's example, patient, respectful, and devoted to truth. The legend of the mummy's curse may have captured imaginations, but her story revealed something deeper. The resilience of those who live beyond myth, who carry the weight of history not as burden, but as inheritance. When Evelyn Herbert's name is remembered today, it is often as the young woman who stood beside her father at the entrance of the tomb. Yet her lasting contribution lies in the way she preserved dignity amid chaos, transforming personal sorrow into quiet strength. The world may always remember the tale of Tutankhamun's curse, but behind that legend stands a daughter who refused to surrender her father's memory to superstition. Through her silence and composure, she upheld the truth that the past is not haunted by curses, but illuminated by discovery. Her life reminds us that wonder and tragedy often walk hand in hand, and that the stories we tell about the past reveal as much about ourselves as they do about those who came before. The shadow of the mummy's curse did not destroy the legacy of the discovery. Instead, it became part of its long journey from myth to understanding. And within that journey, Evelyn Herbert's quiet courage continues to echo, a testament to love, loss, and the enduring power of truth against the noise of legend. In the years that followed the great discovery and the passing of her father, Evelyn Herbert found herself standing at a crossroads between memory and the future. The noise that had surrounded the tomb of Tutankhamun slowly began to fade from the front pages, but its shadow lingered in every conversation, every introduction, and every corner of her life. She could not escape the association that bound her to Egypt. The world saw her as the daughter of the man linked to both the triumph and the tragedy, the young woman who had stood beside him as history was unveiled. Yet behind that image was a person trying to rebuild a sense of normalcy, to rediscover peace after the turbulence of wonder and loss. Returning to England had not been easy. Highclere Castle, once filled with laughter and the presence of her father's lively curiosity, now seemed quiet and distant. The corridors echoed with absence. She found herself walking the same paths in the gardens where she had once listened to his stories of ancient civilizations. The landscapes that had shaped her childhood felt unchanged, yet everything within her had altered. Grief had matured her, and fame had marked her. Wherever she went, whispers followed, people eager to connect her to the legend that had swept the world. She tried to be gracious, but the attention was exhausting. She longed for a life that was her own, not one defined by myth or inherited renown. Evelyn's mother, Almina, had always been a formidable figure, practical and commanding. In the aftermath of Lord Carnarvon's death, she devoted herself to managing family affairs and preserving stability within the estate. For Evelyn, this period was one of transition. She was expected to return to the rhythm of aristocratic life, attending social events and maintaining the family's standing among their peers. Yet something in her resisted. Egypt had changed her. She had seen a world beyond privilege, one filled with both hardship and purpose. The desert had given her perspective, teaching her that the most meaningful achievements were those that endured beyond wealth or fame. Amid the quiet sorrow of her early years in mourning, Evelyn found companionship where she least expected it. She had known Brograve Beecham, a man of intellect and sensitivity, whose calm nature balanced her own quiet strength. He came from a respectable background, and his understanding of Evelyn's experiences went beyond the surface fascination that others expressed. He treated her not as a figure from legend, but as a person still healing from loss. Their friendship grew naturally, rooted in respect and shared understanding. In time, affection deepened into love, and their marriage offered Evelyn something she had not known for years, a sense of security unconnected to Egypt or Highclere, but to herself. Their life together began with hope. Brograve entered politics, serving his country with dedication, while Evelyn settled into the rhythms of married life. Yet even as she embraced this new chapter, the legacy of her past remained close. The press continued to revisit the story of Tutankhamun, especially during anniversaries or when new artifacts were displayed. Her name would surface in articles that retold the tale of the discovery, often paired with photographs from her youth in Egypt. She learned to accept that the world would always see her as part of that history, no matter how far she tried to move beyond it. Evelyn's health, which had been delicate since her teenage years, began to cause concern during the early years of her marriage. She suffered a severe illness that left her weak and partially paralyzed for a time, and though she eventually recovered enough to walk again, the experience altered her life permanently. The once active young woman who had climbed through excavation sites and walked for hours under the Egyptian sun now had to adapt to limitations. It was a painful adjustment, not only physically but emotionally. Yet even in frailty, she displayed quiet resilience. She had inherited her father's endurance, though hers was expressed not through adventure but through perseverance in everyday life. Brograve was devoted to her care, and together they built a life defined by mutual loyalty rather than grandeur. Their home became a haven away from the public eye. They surrounded themselves with books, art, and friends who valued sincerity over status. Still, reminders of Egypt found their way into her surroundings, small artifacts, photographs, letters, and the memories that could never truly be left behind. Evelyn spoke little about her time in the Valley of the Kings, but when she did, her words carried both pride and melancholy. She described not the treasures or the gold but the quiet moments, the feel of the desert wind, the dedication of the workers, the look on her father's face when he saw the tomb's contents for the first time. Those recollections remained vivid, uncorrupted by the spectacle that had followed. The world's fascination with Tutankhamun never truly faded. Decades passed, and each new generation rediscovered the story. Films, exhibitions, and books kept the tale alive, often focusing on Howard Carter and Lord Carnarvon while leaving Evelyn's part as a mere footnote. She did not protest. Her nature was not one of self-promotion. She valued truth and legacy over recognition. Yet she was quietly proud of the role she had played, proud that she had stood beside her father at the threshold of a moment that changed history. Though she had not lifted a spade or deciphered a hieroglyph, her presence had mattered. She had been a witness to discovery, a link between two worlds, her father's dream and the ancient past he had sought to uncover. As the years continued, Evelyn devoted herself to maintaining the dignity of her family's heritage. She ensured that her father's contributions to Egyptology were not forgotten, corresponding with historians, curators, and researchers who sought to understand the early years of the excavation. She offered insights when asked, always emphasizing his respect for the culture he had studied. Her voice carried weight not because she sought authority, but because it came from authenticity. She had seen everything with her own eyes, and her recollections helped clarify details that had become muddled by decades of retelling. Still, she could not escape the knowledge that the myth of the curse continued to outshine the truth. Even when scholars published evidence disproving the legend, popular imagination clung to it. For Evelyn, this was a recurring frustration. She understood why the idea persisted. It was dramatic, romantic, and mysterious, but it also diminished the human reality of what had taken place. The discovery was the result of courage, intelligence, and persistence, not fate or superstition. She wanted the world to remember her father not as a victim of an ancient curse, but as a man whose love of history had led to one of the greatest achievements in archaeology. Her own health remained fragile, and she often had to withdraw from public life for long periods. The limitations of her body contrasted with the liveliness of her mind. She read widely, corresponded with friends across Europe, and followed developments in archaeology with interest. Occasionally, she would receive invitations to events marking anniversaries of the discovery. Sometimes she accepted, sometimes she declined, depending on her strength. When she did attend, her presence was always noted with quiet reverence. People saw in her a living connection to a golden age of exploration, a witness to the moment when the sands of time parted to reveal an ancient world. Brograve's support never wavered. Their marriage endured through the challenges of illness and the weight of shared history. Together, they cultivated a sense of stability that had been missing from Evelyn's early years. He understood the complexity of her emotions, the pride mixed with sorrow, the fame entwined with loss. Their life together was not without difficulties, but it was filled with mutual understanding. To those who knew them, they appeared as a couple bound not by circumstance, but by choice, by affection rooted in empathy and endurance. Through the later decades of her life, Evelyn watched as Egypt's cultural heritage gained renewed recognition around the world. Exhibitions of Tutankhamun's treasures traveled from Cairo to major capitals, drawing enormous crowds. Each time, her father's name resurfaced, often accompanied by romanticized accounts of the discovery. Evelyn followed these events with a mixture of satisfaction and detachment. She appreciated that the artifacts were inspiring new generations, but she also saw how easily history could be simplified into spectacle. The grandeur of the gold masks and jeweled relics often overshadowed the deeper meaning of the discovery. The story of a civilization's artistry, spirituality, and understanding of life and death. She knew her father would have wanted people to look beyond the glitter to see the humanity behind it all. Evelyn never had children, a circumstance that added another layer of reflection to her later years. She sometimes wondered what it meant to preserve a legacy without direct heirs. Yet she came to realize that her inheritance was not confined to lineage or possessions. Her role as a custodian of memory, as the keeper of her father's story, was its own kind of continuation. Through her recollections, through the letters she preserved and the quiet conversations she had with scholars, she ensured that the truth of what they had achieved together would endure. As time passed, the public's fascination with the supernatural softened into nostalgia. The so-called curse became more of a curiosity than a fear, a tale retold for its atmosphere rather than its threat. Evelyn lived long enough to see that shift. She found a certain peace in knowing that history had finally begun to see her father's work in its proper light. The focus gradually returned to the brilliance of Howard Carter's methodical excavation and Lord Carnarvon's essential support. The partnership that had once been clouded by rumor was now recognized for its significance. Evelyn's quiet insistence on truth had helped guide that understanding, even if her contribution went largely uncredited. In her later years, she and Brograve spent much of their time away from the public world, enjoying the slower pace of rural life. She continued to read and write, recording her memories in notes and journals. Those who visited her often remarked on her grace and warmth. Though her body had grown frail, her spirit remained strong, and her conversation revealed both depth and humor. She still spoke of her father with affection, sometimes describing small moments that revealed his humanity, his laughter when plans went awry, his patience with Carter's intensity, his wonder at seeing the desert illuminated under the moon. These memories, more than any artifact, were her true treasures. When she reflected on her own life, Evelyn did not measure it by fame or misfortune. She saw it as a sequence of experiences that had taught her endurance, humility, and perspective. She had witnessed glory and grief, had seen the power of discovery and the danger of legend. She understood that history often remembered events in simplified forms, but she took comfort in knowing that truth persisted quietly beneath the surface, waiting for those who cared enough to look. In that sense, her life mirrored the tomb she had helped reveal, a story hidden beneath layers of misunderstanding, patiently waiting to be rediscovered in its true form. In the end, Evelyn Herbert's journey from Highclere Castle to the sands of Egypt and back again became more than a tale of privilege and adventure. It was a story of transformation, a young woman shaped by her father's passion, tested by loss, and defined by resilience. Though she never sought recognition, her legacy lives in the integrity with which she carried her history. She guarded it not as an ornament, but as a responsibility. Through her quiet dignity, she ensured that the story of Tutankhamun's discovery remained rooted in truth rather than myth. Long after her passing, the world continues to marvel at the treasures of the boy king, and in every retelling of that discovery, there lingers the presence of the young woman who stood at the threshold beside her father. Evelyn Herbert remains part of that eternal moment, the daughter who shared in the unveiling of history, who bore its burdens with grace, and who spent her life protecting the light of truth from the shadow of legend. Her story is not one of tragedy but of endurance, not of mystery but of devotion. She lived a life shaped by wonder and tempered by wisdom, carrying forward the legacy of discovery with the quiet strength that defined her from beginning to end. As the years passed and the world continued to move forward, Evelyn Herbert's name remained quietly entwined with one of the most remarkable moments in modern archaeology. While many accounts placed Howard Carter and Lord Carnarvon at the forefront of the discovery, Evelyn's role was often reduced to the background, overshadowed by myth, fame, and the noise that followed her father's death. Yet those who looked deeper came to understand that her presence was far from incidental. She had been there at the threshold, the first woman to step into the tomb of Tutankhamun in modern history, and her life afterward revealed a strength and dignity that endured far beyond the fever of the discovery. Evelyn had always possessed a natural intelligence that went beyond her upbringing as the daughter of the 5th Earl of Carnarvon. She grew up surrounded by privilege, but also by curiosity. Her father had encouraged her to read widely and to develop a sense of inquiry that matched his own. When she joined him in Egypt, it was not as a bystander, but as someone who shared his fascination for the ancient world. Those who knew her described her as observant and articulate, capable of seeing both the scientific and emotional weight of what they were uncovering. In a field dominated by men, she stood as an exception, not a formal archaeologist, but a participant who contributed through insight, composure, and presence. The legend of the so-called curse, which had consumed public imagination after her father's death, had distorted the truth of her life for decades. It painted her as a tragic figure touched by superstition rather than as the intelligent, resilient woman she truly was. Through the course of her lifetime, she quietly reclaimed her narrative, not through public statements or dramatic declarations, but through the way she lived. She refused to let fear or gossip define her. She had seen the tomb, she had seen the artifacts, and she had seen death, yet she had also seen life continue. Her survival itself became the quiet rebuttal to the myth. Evelyn understood that myths have power. She watched as stories about the curse took root in popular culture, shaping the way the world perceived Egypt's past. But she also knew that such tales said more about modern fear than ancient warning. The supposed curse was never written in the tomb, never spoken by the Egyptians who had created it. It was a product of imagination, born out of coincidence and sensational journalism. For her, the truth was simpler. Her father had been ill for years. His death was the result of infection, not divine punishment. Yet the public, searching for mystery, turned science into superstition. Evelyn had learned early that people preferred romance to reason. In private, she spoke of the discovery as a triumph of perseverance, not of fate. Her memories were rich with detail, but she shared them sparingly. When she did, her tone was calm and precise. She recalled the moment when Carter had first peered through the small opening in the doorway and whispered that he could see wonderful things. She remembered her father's expression, part disbelief, part awe, as he realized that their years of searching had finally led to something extraordinary. For Evelyn, that instant remained a symbol of human curiosity fulfilled, not of doom unleashed. What made Evelyn remarkable was the balance she maintained between memory and life. She never allowed herself to be consumed by the past, even though it followed her everywhere. The discovery had brought her both admiration and grief, yet she refused to retreat into bitterness. Her strength lay in her quiet endurance. While others capitalized on the fame of the tomb, she chose privacy and dignity. She understood that true legacy is not measured by publicity, but by integrity. Over the decades, many accounts of Tutankhamun's tomb have been written, some romanticized, some rigorous, and some filled with the drama of curses and conspiracies. Through all of them, Evelyn's story remained understated. She was there at the center of history, yet history often forgot to look her way. That absence, however, reveals much about the times in which she lived. Women's contributions to discovery and scholarship were rarely acknowledged in full. The world preferred to imagine explorers and adventurers as male, leaving figures like Evelyn on the margins of their own stories. But her presence challenged that assumption. She had defied the expectations of her class and gender by venturing into the Egyptian desert, participating in work that required endurance, intellect, and adaptability. She was part of a new generation of women quietly stepping beyond the limits set before them. Those who met Evelyn later in life often remarked that she carried herself with grace that commanded respect without requiring attention. She rarely spoke of Egypt unless asked, but when she did, her words revealed a deep understanding not only of the event itself, but of what it meant to history. She recognized that the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb had changed archaeology forever. It had drawn the world's attention to the importance of preserving rather than plundering, of studying rather than looting. It marked a shift toward viewing the past as a shared inheritance rather than a collection of curiosities for private display. She knew her father had believed in that principle, and she had quietly carried it forward by supporting efforts to protect cultural heritage. The long shadow of the supposed curse eventually became something Evelyn could reflect on with detachment. What once had caused her pain and frustration became, over time, almost a symbol of misunderstanding that she had learned to forgive. She recognized that myths, while false, could still reveal truths about the people who created them. The fascination with the curse spoke to humanity's enduring struggle with mortality and mystery. The ancient Egyptians themselves had been preoccupied with the afterlife, with the idea that death was not an end but a continuation. In a strange way, the modern obsession with the curse echoed that same fear of the unknown. Evelyn understood this deeply, though she never endorsed the superstition itself. She saw the irony that the very myth which had caused her family such distress also kept the story alive across generations. Her personal life, shaped by illness and quiet endurance, reflected the same steadiness she had shown in youth. The partial paralysis she suffered after her severe illness limited her physically, yet she refused to let it define her spirit. She moved through life with patience, adapting her world around her capabilities rather than surrendering to limitation. Friends who visited her later described her home as filled with calm warmth. She loved music and reading, and her conversations revealed both humor and wisdom. Despite the hardships she had faced, there was no trace of bitterness in her. As time moved forward and she grew older, Evelyn began to see her father's legacy re-examined in new light. Historians and Egyptologists wrote more balanced accounts of the discovery, separating fact from rumor. They acknowledged that Lord Carnarvon's funding and commitment had made Carter's work possible. They recognized that Evelyn's presence during those crucial moments was more than incidental. Some modern scholars began to see her as a bridge between two worlds, the disciplined realm of archaeology and the emotional human story behind it. She represented the link between the passion that drives discovery and the personal cost it often demands. In her own quiet way, Evelyn helped reshape the public's understanding of the so-called curse. By living a long, thoughtful life after the discovery, she demonstrated that the myth had no power beyond what people gave it. She became living proof that knowledge and reason outlast fear. Each year that passed without catastrophe, each milestone she reached, eroded the myth further. Though she never set out to be a symbol, she became one nonetheless, not of mystery but of endurance. In her later years, journalists occasionally sought her opinion for retrospectives on the discovery. She often declined interviews, but when she did speak, her words were gentle reminders of perspective. She would emphasize the collaboration, the years of hard work, and the sense of purpose that had guided the excavation. She spoke of Carter with respect and fondness, recognizing his meticulous dedication despite his sometimes difficult temperament. She described her father with love, portraying him not as the victim of a curse, but as a man who achieved his dream. Her recollections offered clarity to a story clouded by generations of exaggeration. Evelyn's legacy, though understated, became increasingly appreciated in the later 20th century. As discussions around women's roles in exploration and science evolved, historians began to revisit her story with renewed interest. They saw in her a symbol of quiet contribution, of intelligence overlooked by a society that favored dramatic heroism. She represented a kind of strength that did not demand recognition, but earned it through grace and resolve. Modern readers, especially women drawn to history, began to view her as a figure of inspiration, someone who lived through loss, fame, and illness with unwavering composure. Her life also offers an important lesson about how history remembers people. Fame is often fleeting, and the spotlight can distort more than it illuminates. Evelyn's experience showed that endurance and integrity have their own form of immortality. She may not have sought the world's attention, but she earned something rarer: the respect of those who understood. In her restraint, she preserved authenticity. In her silence, she spoke volumes about dignity. Looking at Evelyn Herbert's journey as a whole reveals a remarkable arc, from the privileged daughter of an English nobleman to a witness of one of the most astonishing discoveries in human history, to a woman who carried the weight of both wonder and sorrow with quiet resilience. She had known privilege, but she had also known pain. She had experienced the thrill of standing on the edge of history, and the ache of seeing that moment distorted by myth. Yet through it all, she never allowed bitterness to take root. She remained loyal to her father's memory, protective of his legacy, and faithful to the truth. The ultimate impact of Evelyn's life lies not in the grandeur of her surroundings or the fame of the event she witnessed, but in the qualities she embodied: intelligence, courage, humility, and endurance. She lived in a world that often defined women by their connections to men, yet she quietly carved out her own identity. Though she never sought to challenge society's expectations openly, she defied them simply by existing as she did, educated, thoughtful, adventurous, and independent-minded. Today, when people look back on the story of Tutankhamun, they often focus on the boy king, the treasures, and the myth of the curse. But within that immense narrative lies the quieter story of Evelyn Herbert, whose life reminds us that history is made not only by those who hold the tools, but also by those who carry the memory. Without her, the discovery would still have been great, but it would have lacked its most human dimension: the perspective of someone who saw both the glory and the cost of uncovering the past. Her name continues to appear in books and documentaries, often accompanied by photographs of her in her youth, standing with her father under the Egyptian sun. Those images capture only a fraction of who she was. The rest of her story lives in the lessons she left behind: that strength can be quiet, that truth endures longer than rumor, and that dignity is the truest form of legacy. In the end, Evelyn Herbert's enduring legacy is one of reclamation. She reclaimed her father's memory from superstition, she reclaimed her own story from the margins of history, and she reclaimed the meaning of discovery from the grip of myth. Through a life that spanned nearly the entire 20th century, she witnessed a world transformed, from the age of empires to the dawn of modernity. And through it all, she held on to the values that defined her family's greatest moment: curiosity, respect, and perseverance. She did not need monuments or statues. Her legacy lives in the ongoing fascination with the tomb that she once entered, in the continuing respect for the scholars who followed in her father's footsteps, and in the quiet inspiration she offers to those who study the past not for fame, but for understanding. She stands as proof that even in the shadow of the greatest discoveries, there are lives whose light endures quietly, guiding history toward truth. Evelyn Herbert's story ends not in tragedy, but in peace. She lived long enough to see the myths that haunted her youth give way to a deeper appreciation of fact. She saw her father's name restored to honor, and she knew that the work begun in the sands of Egypt continued to enrich the world. Her life was a testament to the strength of character that endures beyond spectacle. She was more than a witness to history. She was its custodian, carrying its truth with grace until her final days. And so, as history continues to tell the tale of Tutankhamun's discovery, Evelyn Herbert's presence lingers, not as a figure of mystery, but as a symbol of human endurance. Her intelligence, her resilience, and her quiet integrity remind us that behind every great moment in history are people whose stories, though often unsung, give that history its soul. In remembering her, we do not just revisit the past. We honor the truth that she lived for, the dignity she preserved, and the light she carried through the shadows of legend.